Okay, so continuing where we left off. In this video, I'm just going to go ahead and open up my imported image planes. And what we have here is exactly where we left off from our previous lab. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to show you some basic modeling techniques, some really simple yet really effective modeling techniques to just start learning how to create some objects in Maya. Now, with our reference images in place here, primarily front and our side viewport we'll be working from, we'll make it so that we can see it three-dimensionally in our perspective view, because if you remember, these are orthographic cameras. We can only view from 2 dimensions in here, and in fact they're only in a 2-dimensional plane also, whereas here it actually shows it in a 3-dimensional perspective view. So one of the first things I want to show you is how to create an object and then, using the attribute editor, give it some properties that we'll be able to work with really easily. So I'm going to switch straight to my front view, and from here I'm going to create a cube. Now, one of the things I really like to do when working here is I like to go to my shading tab, and in here I want to go to X-ray, so this allows me to sort of see through it like Superman's X-ray vision. And the other thing I like to do is turn on wireframe on shaded. Now when I select off, you'll see the dark blue outline on here. What I'm going to do from here is I'm going to make sure I have my object selected, and we'll start with the blade. And I'm going to hold shift, and I'm going to simply scale up. And I'm going to make this sort of fit the basic size, holding shift and middle mouse button click, of my sword. Now from here I can do a couple things, and maybe a little bit bigger, something like that. Now from here what I'm going to do is I'm going to add some attributes to this object. So with my object selected, I'm going to go to my polycube tab in my attribute editor. If this is not open here, this is your hide show attribute editor button right here. So you can go ahead and click that, and that'll toggle it on or off. Now in here I'm going to go, you have your pcube1. This is the generic naming convention that it automatically creates while you create objects in here. So if I were to create another cube, it would be pcube2. Anyway, with that being said, this sort of has your generic attributes in here, and you'll see everything should be pretty much zeroed out except translate, because I shifted my blade up, and then, or the start of my blade, it's just a cube right now, and then my scale, I scaled it on the y-axis here, so it's X, Y, and Z. So X here in this one, Y, and Z, and that goes for all of these other attributes here. So I've scaled and translated it here in my viewport. The next thing I'm going to do is I have my width, height, depth. Now, and that's in my polycube 1. This is the one we really need to focus on. In here it has a whole bunch of, let's say, more complicated attributes that we don't need to get into yet. Later in the semester, possibly, pending what type of models we're creating. But right now we're only going to worry about this polycube tab here. And this is width, height, and depth. And then we have our subdivisions, width, height, and depth. And these are the ones we really need to focus on. So you'll see here on height, I'm going to add a few height, and it's probably easier to see once I select off, maybe 6, and I'm going to click off, and you'll see it's created. We have 6 subdivisions, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Okay, so now I have 6 different subdivisions on my height. Now on my width, I'm going into my perspective view to show you. Oh, well, width will go here. Let me show you. It's not on my front or side. It's going to be in my perspective where I'll see this one. And I'm just going to do one subdivision here because this will be sort of the I'm going to pull this outward to sort of create the sharpness of the blade, you could say. And in my subdivision's depth, I'll do one also. And then this will be the point of my blade. This vertice directly here in the center. Now, one thing I don't like about it is, although it matches up in both of my viewports, and obviously we're using the same image for front and side, which typically you wouldn't do, but because of we're just trying to keep it really basic, we will. In my side viewport here, you'll notice I'm going to press R and I'm going to want to bring this in. And I'm switching to all four viewports so you can watch how it scales in all the viewports. And you can only really tell in my side and my perspective where you can't tell in my front. So here, now I have a little bit more of a sword-shaped blade in width. So I'm not going to follow this exactly. Concept art is there exactly as it is. It's a concept. So the details will fill themselves in, and we're just going to use this as a base premise for our model. Now, pushing forward from here, a couple things I want to do is I'm going to go into my front viewport, and I'm going to start to match this up. So here, I'm going to hold right click and go to my vertex mode while hovering over the object. So I'm going to have my object selected. While hovering over the object, I'm going to hold right click, and then I'm going to go to vertex. So from here, I'm going to just go ahead and start to sort of pull this shape into place. I'm not going for an absolute perfect replication of this, but I am going to go for as close as I can get it. So down here, the blade starts to thin out, and I'm going to cover and highlight all of these, and I'm just going to sort of bring that in. And again, down here, I'm just going to sort of bring that in. And here, it's just looking a little off, so I'm going to bring that in a bit. And maybe this one just a touch. And you'll notice I'm scaling on all of the edges or vertices that you see here, so to give it that little bit more of a sword look. Now, if it bothers you when you're rotating around in your perspective view and you kind of want to take a look at your blade, one of the things you can do is you can click on these images, these image planes, right? And in your attribute editor over here, you can do looking through camera, and it'll be set to whichever viewport you imported the image planes to. Now the other thing is, you will only see it looking through that camera. You can always toggle it on and off again by selecting it from that viewport and changing it here. This will change the actual camera you see it from, and if you just click in all views, you'll see it in all views. But I don't want to, because it sort of just gets in my way as I rotate around. And I'm going to do the same thing for this one, looking through camera. So now we start to see the shape of my blade. Now another thing is that while I'm modeling, sometimes I really like to have the grid. Sometimes I use it as a sort of a floor plane, depending on what I'm modeling. But in this case, I really don't want it. So I'm just going to go to my display and turn off the grid. And from this point, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to start to make this into a sharper blade, I guess you could say. So I'm going to go into shading in my perspective view for the moment, and I'm just going to turn wireframe on shaded so I can kind of see what I'm looking at. And instead of just pulling out this part, I'm going to pull back these edges, and I'm holding shift, or these vertices. I could do edges also, so I could click on the edge and I'm going to go on this one, and I'm just doing it to this side. Okay, and I'm going to drag these back. Oop. Sort of give it more of a pointier type of blade. And I can also bring them in a bit. And maybe it's a little bit too much, something like that. To give it, this side is the sharpness of the blade. Now here on these two, and I'm just sort of eyeballing this because it is just my concept art, I'm going to bring these ones down also. And maybe I bring these in. So I'm going to show you one quick trick. If I click on this edge and I hold shift and I double click this edge, it'll highlight the entire edge. So it's just a faster way to select. It'll do it with vertices and everything else. So the long way is to select each one individually, and then I can go ahead and bring these sort of in, and maybe I bring these in too. So I don't expect your model to be absolutely perfect. Just give it your best shot. You can sort of eyeball it, but I'm going to go with that as my blade. Okay, and maybe one more thing. I'm getting a little nitpicky here. Bring these in just a touch. Okay, so there's the start of my sword. Alrighty, now it's not perfectly symmetrical. I don't mind. If it bothers you, you can always just select the edges on both sides, and we'll get to that. I'll show you how to do that. Same way we did the actual sword here when I was selecting these vertices. You just highlight them all and then just drag them in, and it'll keep it symmetrical on both sides. There is a symmetry button. I don't want to get into that one yet because it can be very confusing. So let's just sort of get used to the basic tools, and then we'll get into a few more complicated things as the semester goes on, such as symmetry or mirror, whatever term you're familiar with. But it does exactly what it says. It'll mirror or symmetry the mesh. So whatever you do on one side, it will do to the other. But we'll get there. So now that I have that in place, there's a couple other tools I can show you how to use. And in my front view, I'm going to go ahead and create a cylinder. And this is going to be the handle. And I'm going to I'm going to press R one more time, and you'll notice that the center point will become yellow. From here, I can go ahead and scale it in on all axes at the same time, and I can tap F to zoom in. Again, I'm going to turn X-ray on here and wireframe on shaded. So at this point, I've brought it to the size of width I like. Now I want to bring it to the height, and I'm just going to go ahead and start to scale it out. If your handles seem like they're flying off the viewport, what you can do as a quick keyboard shortcut, pressing minus or plus will increase or decrease the size of the handles on your tool. So just so you know, and I'm going to bring this one to about here, and then about here. So I'd say from this view, that's a pretty good size. Now in my attribute editor, again, I'm going to go to poly cylinder, and I'm going to change my subdivisions to 8. 8's just a lot easier number to work with than 20 because that's a lot of polygons there when you have 20 polygons going around subdivisions. And for height, I'd say that's a good number 4. And what I'll do here, in my vertex, I'm going to do the same thing that I was doing before, and I'm going to just start to scale this in. And I'm going to have to do this one more time. in my front view. And I'm just matching it as close as I can to the mesh. To the concept art, excuse me, the image plane. Okay. So I'd say that's a pretty good shape for it. Okay, so that's the base of the handle, and then here is the base of the blade. Now it's a really basic object we're creating here. And in the end, I would like to make it all one solid object, but that will be in the following lab. So the next two things we're going to do is, instead of creating this ring here, I'm going to make it into an oval, but just to show you how you can do it using the attribute editor. Obviously, because we're using the same reference image for both sides, it won't work out. It won't look right in the perspective view. So I'm only going to follow one of my reference images, and this is actually a really common practice when modeling something. Sometimes your side and your front concept art, they don't match up in, let's say, scale. And from that point on, it becomes a judgment call on your part whether you want to follow the front or the side viewport for the concept art of the model you're working on. And in this case, for this particular one, I'll just go with my side. And in my channel box editor, not scale, rotate. I'm clicking on rotate, and then I'm middle mouse button clicking, not Y, in my rotate Z. Middle mouse button click will rotate it on that axis only once it's highlighted. In this case, I want it to be 90 degrees. And if you don't want it to be that one from your side view and you want it to be this one, we can go ahead and make that one 90. Okay, so next thing we want to do is scale it to approximate size. I'm going to go something like that, because the next thing I'm going to do in my attribute editor, I'm going to go to polytorus, as we've been doing, and I'm going to change this to 8 and this to 8, and that just makes it a lot easier to work with. And then my radius, I can go ahead and make it a thinner shape, and then I can also scale it back. And as you mess around with the radius, the shape of it starts to scale larger. So I would say that's pretty close to what I need it to be if I were to create the ring. Now I'm gonna just go ahead and put this on a layer, and this was just to show you how the polytorus properties work. They all have, and I'm gonna all these shapes have their own different properties, like the cone and so on and so forth. So I was just wanted to demo that for you. But for the final model, I'm going to create layer from selected, and I'm going to hide it. You can just delete it if you want, but I'm just going to keep it in my file for, in case I change my mind or something in a future change I might make, if I have a critique that I don't like about it or something like that, just in case. And now I'm going to go ahead and create a poly sphere. In my polysphere attributes, I'm going to go 8 and 8. And I'm going to go ahead and drag it down. And in my viewport, I'm going to scale it to approximately this size, because I'm just going to have the base be a sphere. I think that's a much easier shape to work with than the polytorus, because what we're going to do is we are going to combine these shapes eventually into one big shape, and I'm going to show you how to do that in the next lab. So now I've got my shapes in here that I need. Here's my blade, here's my handle, and then here's sort of the base of the sword. Now there's a couple things we can do for this shape here. I want to show you one new trick. So this is going to be an entirely sort of different video. I'm going to cut this one short here to show you how I'm going to build this part of the blade. So, and this is sort of the base to where your hand won't slip and be cut by the blade itself. And I'm going to show you how to model this part using a different technique using the extrude tool. So I'm going to cut this video short right here, and then I'm going to continue off here in just a moment and show you how to use the extrude tool. So thanks for watching, and stay tuned for the next one.